Greetings, everyone. Good day wherever you are. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, and welcome to the ISBAO IBAC SafetyNet webinar series. I am the voice you're hearing now, Catherine Hills, the ISBAO Operations Manager, and I just want to do a couple of quick housekeeping items. All of the attendees are on mute because of the size of the audience, and you'll be on mute throughout the presentation, but there is a question block for you to ask your questions. Please put those in there at any time during the presentation, and we will look at those after the discussion today is done. That question panel should be on the bottom of your control panel for GoToWebinar. I'm very excited to host this webinar by Polaris Aero. Today's session looks at how sometimes in all the regulations and standards, procedures, and checklists, we find ourselves doing things for the sake of doing things. Today, Steve Bruneau of Polaris Aero is talking with two folks from a Part 91 operation that has a different view of the role that the SMS program plays, and they'll share a case study of how their use of various technologies provides objective insight, and then that allows them to proactively use that information for continuous improvement for their operation. Our speakers today, Steve Bruneau of Polaris Aero. He's the Vice President of Aviation Services at Polaris Aero and is responsible for expanding the company's suite of safety management solutions. He has over 25 years of process consulting experience, helping organizations meet regulatory requirements with ISO 9000, change management, FRMS, and SMS, and achieve new levels of operation performance. Ryan Tollini is Vice President and Head of Aviation for a Part 91 operator. He's responsible for the management of flight ops and tasked with providing safe, efficient, and appropriate transportation solutions to support critical business travel. He joined this current organization in 2010 as a first officer, flying Learjet Model 60s, promoted to captain, served as a safety officer prior to assuming his current role in 2018. Ryan is also an FAA appointed designated examiner and an active participant in the FAA Safety Team NBAA Safety Committee, 2019 NBAA 40 Under 40 award recipient. And last but certainly not least, Ronald Jerome. He is the Aviation Safety Officer at a Part 91 operator and is responsible for the daily administration of the Flight Department's safety management system. Ronald's actively involved in maintaining operations ISBAO registration, implementing an aviation safety action program in partnership with the FAA, launching a flight ops quality assurance program, and with 20 years of professional aviation experience, he has over 8,700 hours of flight time, 4 FAA type ratings, and is a current FAA CFI, CFII, and advanced ground instructor. Steve, Ryan, and Ronald, thank you so much for being here today. I'm going to hand it over to you, and I'll be here if you need anything. So Steve, welcome and take it away.
All right, well, thank you very much, and welcome everyone to today's discussion. Here at Polaris, we like to convey a lot of what we call, safety thought leadership, with the intention of making people think, kind of outside the box of, what do they do now relative to safety, and are there better ways to go about doing that? But too often, kind of as Catherine had indicated, the theme of today's talk, safety is thought of as an extra thing to do. And, really from our viewpoint, that's really the wrong way to look at that. So what I'm really excited about today is to be joined by Ron and Ryan, because they're going to really focus on sort of the people side of the safety solution. How do you think about safety? Why is safety important? And how you go about doing it in a way that isn't thought of as an extra thing. It's just what you do. And when you really think about SMS, I often promote that it's just another form of continual process improvement. And I think what you're going to hear today from these fine gentlemen is a lot of that same theme. So hopefully, you take a lot of good takeaways from today's session and learn a little bit that will help your flight department get to another level of safety as well. Let me advance my slides here. So our agenda today, we're going to cover kind of a wide range of topics down the flowchart of let's basically level set what are the fundamentals for safety improvement. Then we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into it's a high level review of the SMS process. we want to focus on the importance of really looking at SMS from what I call the three-legged stool. And for many of you who have maybe heard me talk in the past, I'm a huge believer in success coming from the combination of people, process, and technology. And if that's out of balance, it's very hard to get the results that you want. I'll talk about that. We're going to then talk a little bit about the importance of department level leadership, right? These things can't just happen in a vacuum. So I think you're going to hear some great stories today from Ryan on that regard. Then we're going to basically talk about the challenges and activities and value add of the things that the safety manager brings to the equation to promote action, which is really what moves the safety needle. And then we're going to go, Ron will describe a specific example of their flight department and the way in which their program helped them learn a lesson. Again, as an example of what you can do in other ways, in other types of data forms. And then last but not least, we'll kind of wrap up with some takeaways. So hopefully this flow will make sense to you guys to see the big picture and then the example. So let's talk about some fundamentals for today's discussion. So the first thing is to understand that there is inherent risk in aviation, right? That's not going to change. It's ever changing. It's dynamic. And the whole idea of safety management is about addressing those hazards so that you improve the likelihood of having a safe flight. So this isn't like a destination. It's a continuous thing that needs to be addressed. And you're always working to address the risk as best you can. The second thing to keep in mind is that process improvement can only happen when you manage what you measure. So oftentimes I'll hear people making decisions based on their gut, and that can be challenging, right? You want to know that when you are looking at making change, you're doing it from an objective framework, and being able to monitor that objective framework on a routine basis to see that any adjustments in your procedures and processes are in fact moving the needle objectively one way or another, depending on what it is. So those two themes, I hope you'll see throughout today's presentation, will resonate quite a bit. So let's talk about a little bit about the whole safety risk management process, because really this is where, from a process improvement standpoint, you really need to think about it. It's going to start with good safety reporting, right? You need to have safety data coming into your SMS program so that you have something to work on, quite frankly, right? If you don't have inputs, you have nothing that will produce an output. And there's a multitude of ways that information can come into your system. Your employees will report things, visitors and passengers can report things. If you've got FOQA and FDM systems, that data is great information as well. And there are lots of other forms of data as well that give you a good indication of things that could be impacting your safety. And then with this great safety data comes the task of the safety manager to then process that in a way that will help produce information. So in our world, in our tools, we talk about the full safety story, being able to go through the risk management process to identify the who, what, when, where, and why of either what just happened or how to avoid what could happen. And by understanding that level of detail, you then have a basis to put together your corrective actions and your risk controls. And then from that, really this is the lesson learned, right? But too often, information about a lesson learned kind of gets put in a book on a shelf somewhere. Maybe you communicate it one way or another, but if it's not a living, breathing thing moving forward, then oftentimes people can forget these lessons learned, and we end up having the same safety problems creep up. So you need to be able to take these lessons learned and roll them into an operational change that informs a better approach on future endeavors so that you don't have the same repeat problems. So really that's when you then close the loop, right? So you take the lesson learned, now move it to the front of the process, thereby reducing risk on all future flights and minimizing occurrences, right? And so when you think about this through time, this closed loop circle here, what you're really doing is producing less events in the future than happen today, and hopefully today's events are fewer than have happened in the past. So if you're continuing to do this all the time, throughout time, what you're really generating here is like a safety improvement engine. And this is something that isn't a once and done, it's a continual evolution that happens through the cadence of your flight operation. And again, you're going to see that in today's discussion with Ryan and Ron. So As I said earlier, many of you have heard me speak in the past, and again, I'm a big proponent of the whole notion of people, process, and technology all working together to get your results. So what do I mean by that? So it starts with the people side, right? The people in your organization have to be well trained, they have to be appropriately resourced, they have to be engaged and empowered to participate in their safety, and they have to be encouraged by their leadership. And again, today, I think what you're going to hear in Ryan and Ron is a lot of this great stuff along these lines. And then the second piece of this is having good processes, right? They've got to be defined. They've got to be lean and not bureaucratic. They've got to be flexible to handle, things that sometimes pop up, and your people have to know how to deal with that in the appropriate way. But then most importantly, they've got to be results oriented, right? You have to have a way of measuring these processes to know that they are in fact working. And then last but not least, the technology side, right? Technology isn't by itself going to solve the problems, but it's going to help the people in process do what they need to do in whatever time they have available to them. So just to put the whole balance thing into perspective for those of you listening today, think about organizations you may have worked at in the past where you may have had the greatest technology in the world, but if you're never trained in it or no one ever really used it, it's effectively useless. And conversely, you may have the greatest people with the best intentions in the world, but if you're bogged down because you don't have tools to help you do it effectively, then you yourself feel like you're not really able to get where you want to go. And you've all seen places where processes are completely bureaucratic, bogged down, get in the way of being able to achieve what you're trying to account. So you can see where you need to strike a balance across all of these things in a way that really makes the system tuned for your flight operation to perform well. And hopefully today you'll have really good insight in terms of what one operator is doing to try to balance all of these different perspectives. So it starts with leadership, quite frankly, from my standpoint. The organization goes as the leader basically goes, right? So let's talk a little bit about some critical things. So the first thing is setting expectations for the culture, right? We've all been at places where you've got things that just don't quite work right culturally, and you can see how that gets in the way of performing at your best. So being able to address that and set expectations to get everyone rowing in the same direction is vital. The second piece from a leadership standpoint is making sure that there's consistent action, not just words. And believe it or not, we come across many flight departments who really talk a lot of great things about safety, but in reality aren't doing the things that they think they're doing. And obviously that's not good. And people see that, it's not just me. And when people know that things aren't happening the way they're intended to, that can lead to a negative culture, right? Now, decisions by objective data versus gut. I alluded to this earlier, right? Like anything else, if you have objective data to substantiate, what your plans are, what your processes are intended to do, and what your objectives are to be met, then you have a way of knowing that you actually are achieving what you're hoping to do. So you want to see leaders expecting objectiveness, not subjectiveness. Continuous improvement, as I touched on a few moments ago with the SMS process, this isn't a once and done kind of thing. So to achieve a certain level of some safety objective, that's great, but what's next year's objective? And did the objective last year, is it too a moving target? So being aware of the fact that this isn't achieving a singular place, but a continuous thing is very important. Complacency. This is one that becomes also very important because as in this industry, let's face it, we have a very good safety record, right? So it's easy to just kind of fall into a complacency of, well, we're really safe and we're good to go. But there's always room for improvement, no matter who you are, no matter what you do. I mean, look at Tom Brady in the recent football games, right? So everyone can find ways of making sure that you get back to looking at what you do as an individual and what you do as an organization to really continue to push forward. And in an organization, when there's a complacency that settles in, it oftentimes can lead to problems. So looking by you guys attending webinars like this, you're looking for information to kind of help your flight department. That's the kind of thing that needs to be promoted as much as possible. And then last but not least, when you see things in your operation that are deviating from standard procedures, the leader has to make sure that that doesn't become the new standard, right? You need to be able to make sure that you're focusing on the processes as written for the organization, because if you let those sorts of things go, then suddenly that deviation becomes the standard. And of course, a deviation could not be the appropriate process that needs to be followed, which could in turn lead to safety problems. So from a leader standpoint, you need a safety program to be able to help facilitate a lot of these things, but you also have to set the tone and make sure that these things are being done on a routine basis. So with that, I'd like to introduce Ryan Tollini, Vice President of his flight department. Ryan?
Steve, thank you. Just to expand a little bit on something that you said earlier, talking about safety as an extra. I think, all of us have either at some point in our careers been a part of or seen or experienced or heard about operations where the primary focus is operations, and safety truly is second. It's an extra. We need to operate. We need to get flights done, and we'll sprinkle in a little safety when we can. I want to just kind of take a little bit different approach on this and share that safety has to be rooted in everything you do, every decision you make. As a new safety manager, I know I would say this: safety is our priority. And I read a book recently, Leading People Safely, written by James Schultz and Brian Fielkow. And they offered some really interesting insight on this. One of the things that they suggest is that safety can't be a priority. And the reason being because priorities are going to change. There's internal influences, there's external influences. Priorities change, they're temporary. Where core values, the core value of an organization rarely shifts, it rarely changes. And we need to make safety a core value. And when it truly is a core value, it's going to guide all of the decisions that we make. In the book, they have a hallmark example, I think, that really, really drives this point home. They talk about CVS Health. And in 2014, CVS Health made a decision that they were going to eliminate the sale of tobacco products in all their stores. It didn't align with their organizational values as a healthcare company of helping people to lead healthier lifestyles. At the time, tobacco sales represented $2 billion worth of revenue annually. That was not probably from a financial decision. Looking from the outside in, we might say, wow, that must have been a really tough decision. But with safety as a core value, it made making those decisions, making the right decision easy. And ultimately, CVS Health continued that year and year after year as a more profitable organization. And as the authors suggest, and I believe too, it's because they're looking at safety as a core value. That's their guiding light. That's what they're using to make decisions. And I think if we use that same philosophy as safety managers and leaders, and safety is ingrained in every decision that we make, it's not something that we're sprinkling on at the end. If that's our guiding light, when we are faced with those difficult decisions, I think it makes making the right decision easier. Next slide, Steve. So hopefully I've done a compelling job of convincing you, why we need to have safety as an integral part of our organization. And some people might ask the question, well, why doesn't everybody have a safety management system then? I think there's probably a lot of reasons why organizations don't, but we could probably narrow this down to four kind of large buckets. I know as a new safety manager, this was one of the things that I found very, very challenging was we've always done it this way. And one of the things that's interesting and we need to think about as safety managers is we don't get any credit for past performance, as disappointing as that is. Things that might have worked in the past, we don't get any credit for that. That doesn't yield us any protection in the future. So just because we've done a process or procedure this way for 30 years and we've never had a problem, that doesn't mean that we're not going to go out tomorrow and not have an issue. So I think this is the best way to overcome this is just from that continuous improvement type of mindset and remembering that we could live our whole lives, we could make it to, 100 years old and do that safely, and 3 seconds of oversight, of distraction, and we could have an an unexpected outcome that's not warranted. So I think that's what we need to think about when you hear this. We've always done it this way. Okay, well, we have done it this way in the past, but does that mean it is the best way? And if we continue to do this in the future, will we expect positive outcomes? I'm sure we've all encountered people like this, leaders that don't want somebody else to tell them how to do things, how to run an organization. But I think this is a big part of professionalism. We need to look to our peers. Is there a better way to do things? I certainly don't have all the answers. I look to our team and to all the mentors that I have, my personal board of directors to help me make sure that we're doing things the best way we can. Cost, this is another one. You'll hear this. Well, it's about the bottom line. We can't spend money on safety. There's a lot of studies out there that'll show you that any investment that you've made in your safety program is the smallest cost that you'll ever see in terms of safety. None of us can afford to have an accident. Any investment that we make to improve safety into our safety management systems, it pales in comparison to what the cost of an accident would be. And there's a number of studies out there, the return on investment of safety management that substantiate that. And then the last piece is effort. It's just too hard. We're a small flight department, just 2 pilots. We don't have the time. We have to fly trips. We have to do all these other things. Ron and I talk about this a lot. I think that the majority of the value of a good safety management system comes from the journey. Steve mentioned this as well. It's about the journey. There is no destination. We're never going to get there. It's about all the things that we learn along the way, and you don't have to build this monumental safety system on day one. It can be very simple. It can be scalable. And it's about the journey. It's not. It doesn't have to happen overnight. All the value is going to come from along the way. Next slide. So when we think about effective safety systems and safety policy, there's a lot of things that go into a good, effective safety management system. But really, I think there's 3. If we had to narrow that down, there's 3 big buckets. Repeatable process, standardization, and defined procedure. And what's interesting about this is that the airlines have done this for a long time. If we look at safety records over the past 20, 30 years, the airline industry has done a remarkable job in terms of improving safety. And it's largely attributable to the focus on this: repeatable process, standardization, and defined procedures. I know this can be a sensitive subject for some folks. Hey, I want to be able to fly the plane the way I like, and there's definitely room, for technique, but it's really hard to argue with the effectiveness of this, and the data's out there to substantiate that. Next slide, Steve. So how do we quantify safety effectiveness? And, I think back as a new safety manager, and it's funny because I didn't know how to do this. I can remember meetings with our accountable executive to talk about the progress of our safety program. And I didn't have a way, I didn't know how to do this. I would say, I think we're doing the right things. We've got some great policies in place. We've got good procedures. We've got good culture. We've got all 4 pillars of, safety management. Things are good. But our safety management system was at a point, and it was at its infancy, and we didn't have the mechanisms to do this. That as the safety program has grown, we now know how to do this. And I think about it a lot in the way that as business leaders, we need to quantify success, right? You know, if you were a shareholder in a company, we probably wouldn't be really satisfied if the annual report that came out said, company had a great year, things were good, great year for us, sold a lot of products, and we did really well. As a shareholder, we would be pretty disappointed with that. We want to some way to quantify that. What percentage did revenues increase? How were earnings per share affected? We need to measure that. And we can do the same thing with safety. And that's what we need to do with safety. We need to be able to use that safety assurance piece to show us that our safety management system is working. A lot of times like Steve said, you know, sometimes ideally you use data, but sometimes people use their gut to make decisions. But it's really the safety assurance piece that's going to show us, did we make the right decision? Is it working? Same thing that we do when we have a change management process. We can't just change something. We have to have some data to support it. And we need to do the same thing with our safety programs. And I'm going to hand it over to Ron. Ron's going to walk us through an example, I think, that's going to shed some light on this. Steve, back to you.
Ron, this is on.
So as Ryan closed out with, it's our responsibility as effective safety managers to turn the safety data we receive into meaningful information that we can then act upon. In addition to having sound safety policy, effective risk management, and a strong safety culture, a mature SMS has to be able to execute on that fourth pillar, safety assurance. The way we execute on safety assurance is through data analytics, analyzing raw data that comes in and identifying insights and trends from that. Your organization's accountable executive needs to see these critical data points. Simply talking about the 4 pillars of SMS isn't enough. So with that, I want to challenge all safety managers with the following. Are you executing on safety assurance? And if so, what tools are you using to quantify safety data? All right. So what is your data trying to tell you? As I just alluded to, data alone doesn't tell you much. As safety managers, it's our responsibility to take that data and turn it into meaningful information that we can act upon. This data can come from many sources: safety reports, safety audits, SIS, ASAP programs, FOCA programs, etc. But ultimately, I encourage everyone to be a safety advocate. Encourage your organization to report the smallest and most benign concerns, not just those big ticket items. When this is done successfully, your data will tell a story. And just like data, aircraft and their equipment also can tell a story if you are listening. Aircraft accidents often don't just happen. Usually they're the result of an oversight or inadequate process or procedure. We're all familiar with the unfortunate Bedford accident that occurred on May 31st, 2014, involving a Gulfstream G4. Without digging too deep into the accident, the NTSB's probable cause was the flight crew members' failure to perform the flight control check before takeoff, their attempt to take off with the gust lock system engaged, and their delayed execution of a rejected takeoff after they became aware that the flight controls were indeed locked. Contributing factors also included the flight crew's habitual non-compliance with checklist. All right. So as I mentioned on the last slide, accidents like this don't just happen. You can see here that the crew had a history of non-compliance. Had someone only been listening to the story this aircraft was trying to tell, this unfortunate accident could have most likely been avoided. This G4 was equipped with a quick access recorder that records a copy of the data provided to the flight data recorder and stores it on a removable compact flash card. This QAR recording recovered from this aircraft contained over 300 hours of data, including 176 takeoff events, including the accident takeoff. So the NTSB reviewed the QAR data to determine if complete or partial control checks were performed prior to every takeoff. Now I want to pause briefly here just to provide a little bit more clarity on what constitutes a flight control check. The NTSB defines a complete control check as the stop-to-stop motions of the elevators, ailerons, and rudder, and a partial control check being the stop-to-stop motion of one or two of the three primary controls. And what they uncovered is a little disturbing. Of the 176 recorded takeoff events, the NTSB was only able to identify 2 complete flight control checks and 16 partial control checks. The airplane's flight logs also indicated that the accident pilots comprised the flight crew on each of these flights, which took place between August of 2013 and May of 2014. So there was a clearly documented history of these 2 pilots not conducting flight control checks. And the most recent partial control check was performed 12 flights before the accident flight. So really in this example, the story the aircraft was trying to tell was practically jumping off the page. The unfortunate part is that sadly no one was listening. Next slide, Steve. So having just seen an example where safety data wasn't listened to, I'd like to now share another example involving flight controls as well, but this time where there was an effective safety assurance program in place and the data received was acted upon. So the 2 charts on this slide represent a safety performance indicator used by the operator to monitor for incomplete flight control checks. In this case, over a 24-month period, with each tick mark denoting 3 months. Now, before we move forward, I want to be clear that the FOCA data here showed that flight control checks were indeed being completed prior to every flight. What the FOCA data did identify was that during the flight control checks, 1 or 2 of the surfaces were not reaching 100% travel. So in these two charts here, I want everybody to pay particular attention to the 2 yellow arrows. These yellow arrows indicate where the incomplete flight control checks were first identified from the FOCA data. Upon discovery, immediate and appropriate guidance was communicated to the group on flight control checks, ultimately resulting in them all but disappearing, as you can see. This really is an excellent example of an effective safety assurance program where the data told a story and an immediate and appropriate response was taken. Next slide, Steve. A critical and often overlooked piece of an effective SMS is safety assurance. We rely upon safety assurance to validate that our SMS is working as expected. These data points not only validate process improvement efforts, but they provide quantitative measures that we can then use to share its effectiveness with our senior leadership. It really is that last important piece of the puzzle. For all operators out there with new SMSs, it's important to recognize that effective safety assurance programs require all the other SMS building blocks to be in place and functioning smoothly, which may take time. In my journey as safety manager, mentorship from the safety community and external data from SIAS and other operators has been instrumental for my growth and development. And I ask that as every one of you continue your safety journey, I encourage you to give back to the safety community as well. And I want to leave everyone with a final thought. For those of you out there with safety programs in place, I want to leave you with 2 questions. 1, how are you using your safety data and turning it into meaningful information? And 2, if someone said to you today, prove to me that your SMS is working, how would you show that your safety management system is effective? And I believe honestly, with an effective safety assurance program, you'll be able to answer both of those questions with ease and confidence. Steve, I'll give it back to you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Ron and Ryan. Again, that was a good example of where you're able to take the information that your system was presenting and act on it. So, Catherine, we can certainly open up to questions.
All right. Really fascinating, and thanks to all 3 of you for this. One question that comes up just directly related to this idea that Ron just discussed, and it is great analogy to quote listening to the story of operational performance. Do you have any suggestions for an operator just getting started with this approach? That's a big question. How would you convince leadership, I guess? Do you need special software for it? What are some thoughts on that?
Ryan, Ron?
Catherine, I apologize. The first part of that, I couldn't hear you. Can you ask the question again?
Yeah, it was a great analogy to the listening to the story of operational performance. Are there any suggestions for an operator just getting started with this approach? You guys talked about, when you were just beginning on this journey and the differences later on. What suggestions do you have as you get started? Which
Well,
this actually dovetails into another question too, that if you don't have a FOQA system, what are other types of safety data that you might recommend to offer best insights into objective safety measures?
I think a big piece of it is just always being aware, always listening. Those cues are out there. I think of it a lot just like equipment, right? Airplanes rarely just break. If you're really listening, they're telling you those signs. There's those telltale things. It did this and then it did that. It's trying to tell you a story. Your safety system, your people, your equipment, it's all trying to tell you a story. And I think, regardless of where you are in the program, I think you just need to be always listening, not have kind of a predetermined, destination or answer in your head. Just kind of keep that open mind.
Great. Let's see. Challenge is oftentimes the amount of time I have as a full-time pilot to also get the safety management work done. How long did it take you to pull together all these tools and procedures you just demonstrated in light of your own external distractions, operationally and including COVID?
So, Catherine, I'll try and take a stab at this one here. One of the things we talked about earlier was constant improvement. And I think constant improvement by definition has no finish line, right? So with that said, I really encourage everybody, never stagnate. Always listen, reflect inwards, be critical, and always look for areas of improvement that you can identify. Develop a strong safety culture. Lead by example. Be a safety advocate for your department. Those are all going to go a long way to helping adopt that leadership, developing that safety culture.
Thanks, Ron. Ryan, any other comments on that?
Just to re-emphasize what we talked about, is it's about the journey. I guess to directly answer your question, Ron, how far are we into our journey? 8 years, something like that. But the journey never stops. We want to continue to keep growing, and that's really where all the value is. It's not about where you sit today. It's about everything that you learn along the way. So that would be my biggest takeaway: is don't get too fixated on where you are today or where you want to get. Just enjoy the ride.
I think Ron, if I could also kind of piggyback on that, I think it's also true that relative to all the different components of your safety program, those that are procedural, those that are training, those that are system and technology that's being used, you didn't just heap that all at once either, right? Those are things that continue to build up based on gap analyses that you found, becoming aware of new things that were available to help close a gap, or to do things that you weren't even aware you could do. So again, by listening in all those different capacities, you were able to build up what you now have over the course of, I think you just said 8 years. So wasn't like, you go shopping and you come back with a grocery cart full of solutions, right? You kind of figure things out as you go. The Amazon cart, right? You just keep filling up the Amazon cart over time.
That's great. I guess that all goes to the shift in thinking that you're presenting of taking safety as a core value that goes with you wherever you go in your organization. So one thing that struck me as you were talking is when you're talking about how to quantify success. That has been a question that has been with me ever since I started in on aviation safety many decades ago. And it reminded me that we don't we usually look at successes. We don't usually look at avoided losses, which is sort of one of the things you're talking about. And it's an interesting piece that goes into this other question that came in, where you gave a great example about how to use safety data to show improvement in a task. And so do you also have metrics that confirm how well things are going, that looks at that idea of quantifying, I'll just say, we'll call it success? And you talked about that a little bit with your SA processes, but what kind of metrics do you use to confirm how well things are going?
So, an effective process improvement needs to have metrics associated with it so you can measure that change, as you've said. An important piece of that is making sure you're measuring the right things. And I think one of the things you're going to find is that those things will change as your SMS matures. I think early on in an SMS, people tend to naturally gravitate towards measuring the things that they have, right? We need to start accumulating data. So, one of the first SPIs a lot of organizations will use is, well, let's track the number of safety reports submitted. How many come from our pilot group? How many come from our maintenance group? How many come from our scheduling or dispatch group? And then as your SMS matures, and you start to incorporate things like ASAP and flight data monitoring programs, you're going to find that those SPIs over time change. So, making sure that you're tracking the right things is always crucial to that. But I think another aspect of really confirming that things are going well is conducting what we do, a safety culture survey every year. We really use that as an opportunity to really gauge the entire department to see where they stand with their perceptions on the effectiveness of our safety reporting system, on the support we have from our leadership, both within our department and externally, and just making sure that all of our processes are appropriate for the scope of our operation.
Great. Thanks, Ron. Ryan, any other thoughts, Steve, on that one?
Ryan and I talked about this quite a bit, and I approach the data not necessarily in a positive or a negative way, or what's going versus what's going wrong. I look at the data as an opportunity. So not in that, hey, 95% of the time we're doing this right. I look at it as, hey, here's an opportunity for improvement. But I think all of our data metrics, I guess if you looked at them from that perspective, will tell you that you're doing well. But that's how I view the data.
Yeah, awesome. Another question came in with regard to the G4 accident. Just talking about it was in part due to communications between owner, passenger, and flight crew. The owner arrived in a hurry, rushed crew, habitual behavior, possibly the reason for repeated failure to check gust locks. But the question is, how can you improve communications regarding safety between flight ops and the C-suite?
I think it's a long process, but number one, you have to have their support. I guess that's where it starts, and I've always been very, very, very fortunate that we always had that support. And again, I think it goes back to what we're saying about a core value. That's your guiding principle. So when you're running late and you want to try to make up that difference, if safety truly is your guiding principle, I apologize that we're late. I apologize that we're running behind schedule, but it doesn't impact. We can only move so fast. If I start moving any faster, I'm going to start to make mistakes. So I think really a big piece of that is those core values. It has to be a core value. Everything you do has to come from that.
Right. I would also suggest that your ability to use objective data as a framework for those sorts of discussions is then raising the awareness of the C-suite of how, when things are done to procedure, then bad things don't happen. So if they're a contributor to forcing you off the rails, so to speak, away from the standard procedure, then they're going to deviate, the potential for risk to go up. So I think, I don't know I know you have a frequency of communicating safety information within your department. Is there a frequency of which you sort of summarize some of that for the C-suite as well? How do you communicate some of these objective measures to them so that they have an awareness of these things that you're talking about?
We do a pretty comprehensive annual meeting, but we're very fortunate. Safety is always, it's always on the forefront in terms of discussions that I have regularly. That's always in the front. Ron has relatively frequent interaction with our accountable executive. I think he meets is it a monthly basis, Ron? How often do you meet?
It's about an every other month basis.
Okay, thanks.
So
Great. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to add to that I think, a big part of that is, when we look at our SMS safety policy, and part of that is, when we look at our SMS manual, one of the first things we have in there is a safety preamble. And this safety preamble kind of affirms our accountable executives' commitment to ensuring the safe operation within our department. And I think that it's crucial that all the operators out there ensure that they're living by that safety policy, that safety preamble that they have in place.
Yes, and I think one of the things, there's another question here regarding how long you've had a formal SMS, Ron and Ryan, and can you talk about your progress at getting it running and effective? And I think this also goes to this idea of what you all were talking about with constant improvement. When you come back to, and I'm going to put a couple of questions together here because in the ISBAO program, you have stages of operation. And what I hear from operators often is, we're not flying much right now. We don't have a lot of data. So there's complications that come along this journey. And so with that, I'm going to roll all this into one. Is when you started this, with your formal SMS, how long ago was that? And has your journey what has happened to your journey as, say, operations have ebbed and flowed, your data available has ebbed and flowed? How has that process looked for you guys?
So I think, as Ryan mentioned before, we started down the safety path probably about 8 years ago or so. Mm-hmm. I've been with the organization now for just about 6.5. And shortly after joining, Ryan took me under his wing as safety officer, and allowed me to be part of the safety team. And it really was eye-opening. And in joining that team, we went from essentially starting with a very basic flight ops manual to pursuing the ISBAO Stage 1 certification, then Stage 2, then Stage 3. Over the course of those 6.5 years, we developed the ASAP program, a FOCA program. We started integrating SIS information into our operation. So, it's been a journey, but with the ebb and flow of flying, one of the things I think that we've tried to always encourage is that, even if flying is slow, look for other areas to identify safety concerns. Even if you're not flying at the time, there may very well still be maintenance going on. There may very well still be personnel in your facility. So look for other areas where, you can identify safety concerns, your facility, procedures around the building. If you look at that inner circle as your aircraft and say, well, normally we've always focused on safety concerns with the operation of our aircraft. Well, I encourage everybody to make that circle a little bit bigger. Look at your facility, go a little bit bigger. Look at your home base. Are there certain safety concerns you might be able to identify just operating at your home base that otherwise during normal flight ops, you might be too busy. So you might find opportunities there hidden that otherwise you wouldn't notice. And then you back it up even one further and you say, look at the industry as a whole. There's certain hot topics in the industry that seem to always, kind of come up, unstable approaches and go-arounds, things like that. safety concerns can always be brought up, regarding those topics without actually having to have data from your specific operation.
One thing I'd like to suggest too, and I think, by people attending today's session, that's a good example of reaching out to others. Ryan talked earlier about all the people that have been influential in his career, and Ron just mentioned how Ryan took him under his wing. Safety is not something that's proprietary, right? You're not going to invent something new around safety. The chances of you being that unique as a flight department versus any other is pretty slim. So there are people out there who are solving problems that you're likely dealing with today. And by participating and sharing with others in the industry at your home base airport, in your region, NBAA, through IBAC, use your network, because there's a lot of solutions out there that give you food for thought to apply to your flight department. So you don't have to be by yourself, I guess is the point. There's a lot of resources you can tap into, but you got to get involved. It's kind of like the data. If you sit in a rubber room and don't talk to anyone, you won't learn anything. But if you get out and ask questions, you're going to learn a lot.
Fantastic.
That's great, Steve. Our organization, we use the ISBAO building blocks, and when I reflect back on it, it worked exactly the way that everyone, a lot of my peers and mentors suggested that it would. Was ISBAO stage one, just focus on getting the framework in place. Get your policies. Just get kind of a basic framework in place. And when I was relaying that story about not really knowing how to quantify the effectiveness, that safety assurance piece, that's okay, because that comes later. Our safety system didn't have that piece in place. Through the stage two, okay, start collecting some data. And during that phase, I remember us being very focused on collecting our own internal data. And then at stage three is where we close the loop, the safety assurance piece. Okay, great. You've got a framework, you've got policies, you've got procedures, you've got data. Now let's connect all the dots and make sure everything works. The next step for us, as Ron alluded, was we look outside of our organization a lot for data. We'll look at a science. We'll look at an airport and say, what are the events that are happening at this airport? Steve, you just happening to somebody else. It's probably it could happen to anybody that flies to that airport. So we're focused on using external data a lot, mainly through the SIS network.
Great response. That is just this ongoing process and how it evolves and is a core value. I think you just summarized that extraordinarily well as you're marching along this journey. That is it on the questions, and I just wanted to see if any of you have anything you'd like to leave the audience with before I close it out.
Ron, Ryan, you have anything?
Just Steve, just like you said, safety's a partnership, and we're all in this together. So just I know I had great mentors and lots of people that I call to ask questions. So just make sure you're doing the same for everybody else, and you're giving back to the safety community.
I guess I'll use that to a little plug for anyone who provides safety solutions like we do. If you have a technology provider, talk to them, right? Because people on our team support many other clients. So oftentimes one of the things I really enjoy doing is finding another one of our customers who a customer having a problem can talk to. So either I can help answer the question, get one of our resources to help answer the question, or just connect one flight department to another to let them share what they're doing. So use all of your resources, including your relationships with your technology providers, contractors, consultants, you name it. I mean, there's a lot of resources out there, and you're not alone, I guess. So use us as much as you can.
Thank you so much. It's Steve, Polaris Aero, Ryan, Ronald. This was a fantastic presentation, and you have really given a new umbrella of making this a core value and talking about the journey and how your journey has worked. And thank you so much for sharing that story as well. And I think we're all listening very closely if we'll do that. So with that, I am going to close out this ISBAO SafetyNet presentation. Again, thank you to Polaris Aero. You guys are awesome in this, your leadership and mentoring. And thank you, Ron and Ryan, for sharing your stories and experience as well. And I would say we are all available to any of you. Follow up with us. We would love to hear from you. We will be having more SafetyNet sessions, and I know that Steve and the team at Polaris will be joining us in those, and I'm excited for the new topics to come. We're getting some thank yous for the presentation from the group. So for all of that, I wish you all a good day, stay well, and we'll see you again soon on an ISBAO SafetyNet. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.